Hello, folks. This is the Catholic OCD podcast. Before we start today's show, I want to throw a disclaimer out there. Today's episode, we're going to talk about some graphic material. We're going to talk about human sexuality, homosexuality, and the transgender movement. So if you have anybody of young age or anybody who's not ready yet to watch this kind of content, I want to give this opportunity now to shut the show off. For those of you who are ready for this deep conversation we're going to have, I hope you guys stay tuned and enjoy the show. Hello, folks, and welcome to the Catholic OCD podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nolfi. Today on the show, we have Brittany Pope. She's going to talk to us about her involvement in the transgender movement and how God healed her and brought her to a faithful life in Him. That's the topic of today's show. This is the Catholic OCD podcast. Okay, well, I got the music cranked here today. Well, we're just going to do it the old-fashioned way. Just shut it off. You guys might notice, as I watch this, we have this new computer system. Oh, there's my theme song all the way down there. You see that? We got this new computer system, so I'm still getting used to it. Anywho, today's topic is a deep one and a controversial one, but I think it's one that we have to be faithful to truth and faithful to the scriptures and the teachings of the church. So I don't want to really get in the way much. I want to introduce to you guys Brittany Pope. Brittany, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I don't know how to run my computer, but
okay.
Other than that,
I appreciate you having me on the show today.
Oh, thank you for coming. So, Brittany Pope. Now, are you related by chance to, is Pope short for Bishop of Rome? Successor of Peter?
You know, it's not.
It's not. Okay. So you're not.
Not in my family lineage.
Okay. So you're not related to, Pope Francis or anything like that. I am not. We do a lot of bad jokes on this show. Just, I don't know if
Need a little drum.
Yeah. So anyways, let's go ahead and just dive right in. We purposely tried really not to discuss much of your story. Mm-hmm. We, just some of the basic details because I wanted to, literally, ask you questions that I don't know. So why don't you go ahead and tell us some of your story and how you ended up finding yourself deep into the transgender lifestyle.
Yeah, so for me, I grew up in church, actually, until I was 18, and heavily involved in church. We had a really bad church split, and it just devastated me to my core. And so I walked away from church wanting nothing to do with organized religion. I was over it. Now, all throughout that time of being in church and growing up, there were little things that would happen, little seeds that would be planted. I was a tomboy. I didn't have, a traditional girly look about me. All my friends were guys, and I remember someone told my mom when I was young, maybe 8 or 9, if you keep letting her dress that way, she's going to grow up to be gay. And, people picked on me in school just for being more of a tomboy. And just little things like that stuck, And I started, I identified more with, male family members, male friends. And I thought, from a young age, I thought, why do I feel this way? I think, I should have been a boy. And but they were like little fleeting thoughts, because growing up in church, it was like, no, that was wrong. Don't even, I was able to suppress those thoughts. And then, growing up, I would say early childhood into my teens, I realized I was attracted to women. And so for me, that was something that I was like constantly struggling against.
Now, what age would you say that started?
I was 7 when I remember having my first crush, and it wasn't on a guy, it was on a girl, on a TV show. So that was, 7. So, and, I think really at that age, you're too young to even understand.
This might sound weird, but am I able to know the TV show?
Yeah, it was actually, it was a show called Step by Step from the 90s. You remember that show?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I thought...
Which one? There was 3 girls.
Yeah, so...
I had a crush on all of them.
So,
and Susan Summers.
It was that's hilarious. So it was actually, ironically, because she was kind of tomboy too, it was the middle daughter. So
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, but, and so I feel like at that age, you're really too young to even understand, like, so it wasn't like people were influencing me or anything. It was just, that's just, how I felt.
I would have put my money on Kelly Kapowski. Saved by the Bell. That's just me.
That's funny.
My wife's watching this right now. She's like, gosh, I hate him. So you start to have these feelings.
Yeah, so, once I got into high school, I started, I had boyfriends, because that's just kind of what you were supposed to do. And I thought, it was always in the back of my mind, but it was easier to suppress those feelings while I was in church. It wasn't until I stopped going to church completely, just totally turned my back on God, that the voice inside of me got quieter, and I just started doing what I wanted, And so I remember, having my first girlfriend, and there was still that voice inside of me that was like,
now, what age would you have been?
I was 19.
Okay, so after
19,
high school.
Yeah. And so, that voice in me was still like, this is wrong, but it was like, I'm just going to do what I want. Cause I feel like this is who I am. And so this is what I'm going to do. And I didn't have anybody to, bounce these things off of. I didn't have anybody, in my life really at that point that could have been like a mentor to me. And so, I kind of just was, whatever my friends were doing and saying, they were all on the same page as me. I got into like the LGBT community and found friends there. And so they all were super supportive of the things that I was doing. So I had nobody telling me like, hey, maybe this isn't right. Maybe this isn't what God has planned for you. Because at that point, my heart was so hard and I didn't really care.
Yeah. I think that, I think that sometimes there's 2 different extremes when it comes to the viewpoint of homosexuality in, let's say, the Christian community. So one is that more of something that you see creeping in of like, hey, it's fine because God is love and he just wants you to be happy. God doesn't care who you love. And there is that's creeping in more and more into the actual church itself, into the Christian communities itself. Obviously, we would both disagree with that.
Right.
I think that the other viewpoint, which I also think is wrong, is this viewpoint of, no, this is all in your head. You're choosing to have this attraction. This is, you're just making it up, and this is just a choice, and nobody battles this more than anybody else. And I really think that that's wrong also. One of the reasons is, and I don't know if you've ever had anybody talk to you about this, I know that in Catholic theology, or in the scriptures, like in Hebrews, it talks about how Jesus was tempted in all ways, but without sin. But I think that what we have to do is we have to understand the difference between ordered temptation versus disordered temptation. So I believe that Jesus was tempted, but that all of his temptation was from an ordered temptation. So, example, what does Jesus get tempted with? He gets tempted with good things. Don't die. That was his biggest temptation, not to die. So even in Matthew 16, when Peter's like, you don't have to die. We'll defend you. And Jesus says, like, get behind me, Satan. He's speaking to the temptation that Satan always has on him, not to die. Not dying is not a bad temptation. It's an ordered thing. It's a good thing not to die. He's tempted with food. He's tempted with power. None of these things are disordered temptations. When you get to Adam and Eve and the fall of humanity, I think that what it is that the human being is told to avoid this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which the tree itself is good. The human being cannot handle that amount of knowledge. I always say this, like, water's good. If I give you a glass of water, it's good. If I poured a swimming pool full of fresh water down your throat, it would kill you. It has nothing to do with that water being bad. It's just we as humans are limited. When Adam and Eve partake of that fruit, it changes them. And what happens to them that would be different than the temptation Jesus goes through is that they have to deal with a disordered temptation. They immediately, this couple who walked around naked, who were able to love each other truly the way they're supposed to love each other, as soon as they have this change, they look at each other with shame, with guilt. Shame and guilt comes from our disordered temptation. So I don't know if you're familiar with St. Augustine. Lived in the late 300s, and one of his big things was he talked about how he robbed his neighbor's pear tree, and he would take the pears, he'd run, and then he'd just throw them away. He robbed it not from an ordered temptation like, I'm hungry, but from a disordered temptation like there's absolutely no reason to do it. And I argue that humans, we all have to battle disordered desires. It's not just good things that we use in the wrong way, but it is disordered things. And I think that different people, and it could be genetic, alcoholism. Alcoholism can run in a family's bloodline. And somebody can really be born with this thing is in there. And it's more than somebody down the street. Anger, highly addictive personalities. And I think that it's an okay thing to say, like, yeah, there are people in their disordered temptation to sin. And this could be through pornography or, a man doesn't get married and then all of a sudden, a Christian man doesn't get married and all of a sudden like, I don't battle lustful thoughts anymore. It's all gone. But I think it's okay to say, different people have different disordered temptations and that we as humans have to deal with those. And I think that for certain people, I think that could be their cross to bear, could be same-sex attraction. And I think to tell somebody, it's not real. It's in your head. I think that's undermining the burden they have and the cross they have to bear.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's doing a disservice to the individual that's struggling, with that. I think we all, like you said, we all do have different propensities to different things. Some, like you said, maybe it's a gambling addiction or, addictive personality or, whatever the case may be. But I think on the other side, people saying, oh, God is love and you just love whoever you want, are misguided too, in that I feel like that's a prideful stance to take. We're not here to serve ourselves. We're here to serve and worship God. That's our purpose. And so, obviously people not being Christians don't understand that. And so, that's definitely coming from a place of pride. And, but I think it is a disservice to say like, oh, people are just like, that's just make believe. It's not. I mean, it is something that people really do struggle with. But I think that's where, God's grace is sufficient. And he gives us the grace to walk through those things. So, his grace gives us an allowance for, like, God understands when you're struggling, you're trying to overcome. And it's one thing to be tempted, but being tempted isn't a sin. It's the actions that you do, regarding that temptation. So acting on the temptation is what the sin is. And God understands, like, we are tempted in different ways, but when we turn to him, instead of, turning to that sin and giving into that temptation, that's where his grace comes in. And
now, did you happen to notice, like, okay, the first time maybe you gave into this temptation, right out of high school, did you happen to notice, okay, maybe a guilt or a conviction that you felt that first time? Did you find it that the more maybe you engaged into this, that guilt started to fade away?
Yeah, I did. I did have a lot of guilt and conviction after that first time, and but I just kept. It was like I started crossing lines that I never thought I would. And yeah, as I continued on down that path, it was like the voice inside of me got smaller and smaller, and it was to the point where I couldn't hear the Holy Spirit anymore. I think I still felt a small conviction in me, but my heart was so hard, I just didn't care. Like, I wanted to live how I wanted to live, and I didn't put much thought into, when I was backslidden, I didn't put much thought into, what God wanted me to do or what the Bible said. I would often twist scripture to, fit my arguments. Which is a pretty common thing that people do, when they're backslidden or they want to live a certain way. They'll twist scripture to, support their argument.
Yeah. I think that, like, at least in the Catholic world, we really emphasize this idea of our salvation coming from our receiving these three theological virtues that Paul talks about: faith, hope, and love, or faith, hope, and charity. And the understanding is that, like, sometimes when we back off, we start to engage in this grave sin. It doesn't mean that we lose our faith. We can still believe that there's a God. That's sometimes the reason for wanting to twist scripture, because there's a part of our brain like, oh, I believe God. Like, I want the good of religion, but I don't want, like, the bad stuff. We don't necessarily lose the virtue of hope. Hope, we'd be like, yeah, I want to go to heaven. I think I can go to heaven. Hope also is something that's good, because hope is the part that also helps to bring us back. Faith also is the part that is there, and deep down it could also tell us that, like, listen, what we're doing is wrong. But the Catholic emphasis is that virtue of charity. That's the fuel. That's the energy to live the Christian life. That's the power. It's not from you. It's a virtue. And that when we fade away and then you feel that the Holy Spirit fade inside you, like, we would say that, like, yeah, you get to a point where that charity is gone. Somebody could still believe, but in order for them to be back in a state of grace, they really do. They need that charity placed back, the energy to submit to the will of God and to love God in the right way. And I wanted to read one scripture verse. This is from Romans. Chapter 1. And basically, Paul, at the beginning of Romans, he gives a warning. Paul always does this because, listen, everybody knows Paul talks about grace so much, but Paul also he gives warnings. He doesn't want anybody to be fooled.
Right.
And I think Paul makes it clear, like, yeah, if you're living for God, you have that charity, that virtue of charity, the power of Christ inside of you. You know, you're an adopted child. You're in a state of grace. You're on the vine. But don't think that, I could just go live however I want to live, and I'm going to be fine. So in Romans, Paul says, therefore God abandoned them in their sinful lust of hearts to impurity in the mutual degradation of their bodies. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and offered worship and service to the creature rather than to the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. That is why God abandoned them to their shameful passions. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural practices. Likewise, men gave up unnatural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another. Men committed shameful acts with men and received in their own persons the fitting penalty for their perversion. Furthermore, since these people did not see fit to acknowledge God, he abandoned them to their depraved way of thinking and to all types of vile behavior. As a result, they are filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and malice, reveling in envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful, as they devise new ways of doing evil and rebel against their parents. They are senseless, faithless, heartless, and ruthless. Although they are fully cognitive of God's decree that those who behave in this way deserve to die, they not only do these things themselves, but also praise all those who engage in such conduct. In this thing of Paul talking about, we have like these disorder temptations and desires that all humans have. All of us have them. They could be different things: slanderers, gossips, idolaters, temptations for lustful desires, homosexuality. But when we engage in these, God did not create robots. And God will allow us, he will call for us, but he will allow us to engage in these. And you can see this is nothing new. But even in the Roman Empire back then, it's amazing. As these people do this, Paul says, not only do they engage in these things, but they applaud those who engage in them. So picture what the world would be like if all of a sudden some of the sinful stuff, not only do people do them, but the world's actually cheering you on. We don't have to imagine much because it's here.
Yes, and that was something that I discovered, when I decided to transition. Everybody was really supportive. In fact...
so go back. How did this part progress? So you go from having these thoughts going all the way back to when you're younger. You engage in relationships with other females. You always thought, you were a tomboy. People called you a tomboy. When do you actually when does it enter your mind to actually make this change?
So I think it was always in the back of my mind, but as more and more of my friends started to transition, a lot of their stories were very similar to mine. They were a tomboy, they were attracted to women, and I think for me, I viewed women as weak, and I didn't want to be that way. I just had all these backwards thoughts, a lot of things, in my early childhood. I just had bad views of men, and that really kind of shaped, I guess, my thoughts as an adult. And, so more and more of my friends started to transition, and, their stories aligned with mine. And I thought, something clicked, and I thought, well, maybe that's for me. Maybe that's the piece that's been missing, because throughout that whole time, I did always feel like I was missing something. I was a very angry person. I was just really miserable to be around. I just had this anger all the time. I always, even going out to eat with friends, they would be embarrassed because it was like I was always trying to start a fight. If something didn't go my way, it was just like instant anger. I was angry. And so it was 2015, September of 2015, when I decided to finally start transitioning. I had moved away to Utah, and I went to a doctor there, and I didn't have to see a therapist. I didn't have to have like any counseling. I just went to the doctor. She had me sign a piece of paper called informed consent, and they gave me my first shot of testosterone that day.
Now, how old did you say you were?
It was 2015, so I was like 27.
Okay.
27-ish.
Now, so they give you a shot of testosterone. Like, how soon do you feel effects from that?
I would say it was pretty immediate. Within maybe a month, my voice started to drop, and the shape of my face started to change. My fat started redistributing to, away from my face and away from the traditional places that women are have a little bit more fat than men. And shortly after that, so that was September of 2015. January of 2016, I was meeting with a surgeon to have a bilateral mastectomy. Again, I didn't have to see a therapist. I had no therapy at that point. I hadn't talked to anybody about, what I was struggling with. I told her what was going on. She said, I think you'd be a perfect candidate. $7,000 later, I was getting a bilateral mastectomy. It was like there were no hoops to jump through. Nobody questioned me. It just, I convinced them well enough, and it all happened so fast, and it was just that impulsive, this is what I want. I don't want to have to think about, what I'm doing or the future. This is what I want right now in the immediate. And so, that's what I did.
Now, so when you have the surgery, you wake up from surgery, is there any regret that hits you? Like, does the idea of the permanent kind of thing, like, not hit you until later? Does it hit you right away? Has it ever hit you? Like, what were your feelings after the surgery?
So actually the night before, I was reconsidering it. I don't know if it was just pre-surgery jitters or if that voice inside of me was coming alive again. I ignored it, and I maybe had a little bit of regret when I woke up, but not really. I think I was pretty numb. This was just what I wanted, and I wasn't thinking about anything else.
Did it kind of feel like at this point it's not walking down a path, it's like jumping off of a cliff? You're like, You're all in.
Yeah, it was like I was disassociating to reality completely, and I was just like, I had begun to create this false reality for myself in what I thought that I wanted, because obviously what I was doing, you can never truly change your gender. I mean, it's science. You're either born with XY or XX chromosomes, and that's biology. There's no way to change that. The only thing you're changing is your outward appearance, which is what I was doing. But I wanted to convince everybody else that it was real too. And so, I had a lot of anger surrounding that as well. But yeah, I think I had just disassociated, and so I didn't have that immediate regret. Now, obviously, years later, I did have a lot of regret. And so, I had to get implants to rectify what I had done, and that was very expensive. So I spent a lot of money.
Yeah. Now, did you find yourself like being like? It's kind of the thing, you're trying to be somebody different. Kind of like I don't even remember the story. What was it? The emperor has no clothes, and just everybody saying like, yeah, no, you have clothes, and you have clothes, and then that person's like, well, no, you're naked, and everybody freaks out on them. Do you find yourself purposely surrounding yourself with people who are telling you what you want to hear, telling you like, yeah, this is normal, you're doing the right thing? Are there family members or anybody else that are trying to say the other way? What was going on as far as who you were surrounded with at that time?
Yeah, I surrounded myself, with friends and people who were very supportive and like, yeah, you're doing the right thing. Like, there's nothing wrong with what you're doing. And yeah, there's science to back up what you're doing. I think you could make science argue anything, really. But, and again, you can twist scripture to make any argument, whatever fits. But I did have my family was very supportive of me. Like, they were never, they never made me feel bad. But there were times where they were like, hey, you're like, are you going to regret this? You may regret these decisions. And I think they were very sad. They were very happy when I decided to detransition. But they never, bullied me or forced me to do anything. They just, I don't know. I think they were very reserved in the things that they would say to me, because I think they didn't want to push me away. Because me, the way I was, being around them was better, I think, than them not seeing me at all. And I think they knew if they pushed me too hard, I would probably not come around.
Yeah. So, so after you have your surgery, your first surgery, what other changes do you start to see as how long how often would you get testosterone? Like, how much did that affect you? What other changes did you see?
Yeah, I would take it weekly. It was like a weekly injection that I had to give to myself. And the changes within a year and a half, I had like a full beard. My voice was completely dropped. Like, I passed perfectly. You would have never known that I had been born a female. If you had just, like, in passing or we had a conversation, you wouldn't have known. So I would say about 2.5 years after I got my mastectomy, I had a hysterectomy. And again, it was just, I met with my doctor. I told her what I wanted to do, and she said, let me put you in contact with a surgeon. Now, this was back in Pennsylvania. Let me put you in contact with a surgeon who will do that. And again, it was very quick, and my insurance actually paid for that, so I didn't have to pay for that out of pocket.
Now, this is when you're still in Utah?
No, I had moved back to Pennsylvania at this point. Yeah, this was like 2018.
Do you ever wish some of the Mormons would actually got to you? And I know they got some wacko beliefs, but they're strict in some ways.
Yeah, I try not to think about, I wish I would have done this different, or I wish I wouldn't have, because I feel like I was born for a time such as this, like Esther talks about, she was born at the exact right time. And I believe that God, he doesn't make mistakes. It's not by chance that we're, when we're born. I think, he's very intentional in the things that he does. And so we're all born for a specific time and purpose in the time that we're born. And so,
I definitely didn't want to imply any regrets. That's just, I sometimes it's hard for me to get my dumb jokes in. So I look for opportunities to drop them. And then usually in the comment section, you'll see people will be like, this show sucks, but so anyway, so you're back home at this time. You have the beard. Let's actually have some photos here. So where is this at? And
that is, I just went on a trip to New York. Then
is that the who's that? What's that statue?
I have no idea. It was just outside of a random building.
Okay, I didn't know if it was one of the kids from E.T. when they were riding the bike. So, and how old are you here? Or how long ago was this? Did you say?
Like 2018, beginning of 2018.
Okay. So, see that one? Yeah.
That was on the same day. Yeah.
Same day. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I probably, because I feel like there are certain people you see in the transgender movement where I feel like you can see it.
Yeah. You can
this one, I mean, honestly, definitely not. That's a I don't want to say it was a good job, but
Right.
yeah, I mean, it's that was definitely something. So what ends up happening? How did you get from that to where you're at?
Yeah, so
now?
I was actually for a brief period of time I lived in Florida, and I think this is proof that you don't have to be inside of a church or in the four walls of a church for God to reach you, because I still wasn't going to church. I was actually sitting in my living room watching YouTube videos and kind of went down this rabbit trail.
Was
how
it
one
the OCD
does.
podcast you were watching?
No,
It
but
didn't exist yet.
but yeah, I was watching. I don't even know what I was watching, and a video popped up, and it said 23 Minutes in Hell by Bill Weiss. I thought that's kind of weird, but it's kind of interesting, so I'm gonna watch it. And it scared me like nothing, and it was like that voice instantly inside of me. It like reignited, and I was so scared. I actually didn't sleep that night because it was like instantly I was like, oh no, like what have I done? I've gone too far. This is bad, because like I said, I grew up in church from basically birth to 18. I knew all the scriptures. I knew the Bible. I knew what it said, and it's like everything just came flooding back to me. So for the better part of that year, I struggled. I didn't know what to do. I knew I made a mistake, but I didn't know how to fix it or where to go. And actually, that was when that fall of 2018, I started listening to a local podcast, Believers Church. Well, it's not a podcast. It's their show, that's on YouTube, and their website. And Pastor Joe, I started listening to his messages, and they really they calmed the anxiety and fear in me. And it was like each message, because I still wasn't ready to go back to church. There was still a part of me that was really broken from my experience in church before. And but I was curious, so I started listening to these messages by him, and there was one message that stood out to me. It was a series, and it was called "Is It Okay To?" The specific message was, "Is it okay to be gay or attend a gay wedding?" And what really struck me was right before he started preaching, he said, "Hey, I love the amens; they're great, but this week let's not do that." I think those can feel very pointed at times, and so he wanted everybody to feel comfortable and safe in that. And I just thought that was really interesting. I've never heard a pastor do that.
One of the things I say sometimes is, because listen, if you're watching the show, like, let's just be very honest here. This is not 50 years ago where transgender people or people who practice homosexuality or people who have homosexual desires, this is not where, like, this is somebody that you heard somebody knew of somebody. Mm-hmm. Like, we all have a relative, a cousin, a friend, somebody we have known all of our life. This is like stuff that hits home. Also, while it is, it's a grave sin. It's a bad sin, and it's something that's, God really detests in the Bible. He hates all sin. At the same time, if we as Christians are people who we notice that the sin that we hate the most is the one that we don't struggle with, then your theology is really wrong. Like, if you just can't stand people who drink too much, and that's like the worst sin in the world, but yet you don't struggle with that at all. But or you hate people who just have anger or have this or that, but you don't see your own sinfulness. I mean, this is where, these are really the people that Jesus flipped out on.
Yeah. And
we have to recognize our own sinfulness and that we're in this together. And it can't be the thing listen, you need to be holy like me. It's one of those things, I always tell people, even at my Bible study, I always say that one of the prayers that has to be said for somebody to be saved is, God, I suck. And if you don't have that moment in your life where you realize it's not your natural goodness and righteousness, we are all dependent on God's mercy. we all have to be the penitent man who stands outside the temple, looking at the ground, pounding on his chest, saying, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. So tolerance, though, but on the other hand, we have to understand that people confuse tolerance with agreeance. Mm-hmm. And they think to tolerate somebody means you agree with them. And if you don't agree with them, then you're not tolerant. That's not tolerant. Tolerant is when you disagree with somebody, and yet you can still show them love. But love is also showing the truth, you know. I leave the toilet seat up. My wife doesn't agree with me. She tolerates my existence. So, yeah, that is a very important thing because, you know, sometimes, too, I think people who are so loud about it, you know, if you ever see American Beauty, remember that? Like, sometimes it's like, man, come on, I don't know. You're talking about this too much. Like, what the heck's going on behind the scenes here?
Well, and I think it's about meeting people where they're at, you know. That's how you reach people. You're not going to reach people by beating them over the head with a Bible. You know, it's, you know, Jesus never watered down his message. He was very, you know, he said what needed to be said, but he did it in a loving way. And, you know, I think people are more likely to listen to you when you're respectful. And like you said, like, you don't have to agree with somebody to love them or show them love.
Yeah. I mean, people accuse Jesus of, and I think people, this is another part too where we have to have a balanced approach. But, you know, you'll hear people say, well, Jesus ate with sinners, and he did. Why? Jesus went to sinners. He went, you know, when he called Matthew, hey, leave your job. You're a cheating tax collector. Leave your job. Come follow me. When Matthew throws this feast, Jesus eats there. Why? It wasn't to talk about how much the Browns suck, you know, because there wouldn't be enough books in the Bible. I mean, but it was to change their lives. He saves the women caught in adultery and says, go sin no more. But the people who thought they didn't need him, now those people he calls the offspring of Satan. Those people, he says, will die in their sins. And I think we as Christians have to make sure that we don't go, well, everything's okay, you know, everything's fine. But we also can't go to the other end where we're, you know, burning crosses in people's yards and stuff like that. So you come back, you start to have the I'm guessing you quickly stopped the testosterone.
It wasn't quickly. I did eventually, but I still struggled for the better part of that year because I knew what I needed to do, but I didn't know how to do it and how, if it was even, like, what was going to happen. You know, towards the end of 2018, beginning of 2019 is really when I stopped taking testosterone completely. And, you know, I struggled for, yeah, like I said, the better part of that year. I started towards the end of that year going to Believers, like, in person, and I really got a lot out of those messages, but I still felt like I was being tormented because I still didn't fully surrender. And so there was a moment in 2019, in January, that I remember being in my room, and there was a point where it was just like, I either have to walk away from God or I have to fully surrender this. I can't live in between anymore. And I remember looking up at my ceiling, just like I was crying, and I just said, you know, God, I surrender. I'm going to do this. You know, I'm going to do what you're asking me to do, and I'm scared. I don't know how this is going to go, but, you know, please just be with me. Don't leave me alone in this, and help me to represent you in the best way. And it was really that moment that, like, a lightness entered my heart and a peace like I've never felt before. So I was still scared. I didn't know, you know, what was going to happen, but I had peace, like a peace that I've never had before entered my heart. And so, you know, where there was anger, it was completely replaced with joy. Where there was that, you know, that discontentment, it was filled with peace. And, you know, I think a lot of the fear was that I didn't know how I was going to look. You know, I felt like I went too far. Now, how do I, what am I going to do? Because nobody wants to look like a freak out in public, let alone, what bathroom, am I going to have, are people going to give me a hard time now in the bathroom? Am I now putting my own safety at risk? Like, how is this going to work? And I just had to say none of that matters, because I have to do what God's asking me to do. And I know, like, it's going back who he created me to be is right. So no matter what happens, I know that I'm.
Now,
right
you mean with
God.
the bathroom because it takes a while for like your hair to grow?
Yeah.
Longer.
And before my hair grew out, even though I didn't have a beard, I still looked. I mean, I didn't look like a girl, and I didn't have. I had the mastectomy, so I didn't have a chest, and I just looked very masculine. And in the year 2019, it's like everybody's hyper aware of people's gender now, and they're like constantly looking at you. So if you're a little bit masculine of a woman, even, it's like, well, are you? And everybody's so up in arms, they're ready to just knock you out. They don't care. And so that was just really scary.
You just went to Target, right?
Right. But yeah, it was really really scary, walking through that season. But God was always with me, and that was 2019 was probably one of the best seasons I've had with God. It was just, I grew so close to God. He showed me so many things, and I would say that's really when, I came back to God and just really turned things around.
One thing, because especially following God sometimes it's hard, right? I mean, things you'd want to do, the temptations of the flesh, the desires, all the stuff we read about in Romans. When you become a Christian, God does help you with this stuff, but it doesn't just go away. I'm going to read this. This is the official Catholic teaching on chastity and homosexuality. This is from the CCC, Catechism of the Catholic Church. I know you're not Catholic, but that's okay. So it says, homosexuality refers to relations between men or between women who experience an exclusive or predominant sexual attraction towards persons of the same sex. It has taken a great variety of forms through the centuries and in different cultures. Its psychological genesis remains largely unexplained, basing itself on sacred scripture, which presents homosexual acts as acts of grave depravity. Tradition has always declared that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. They are contrary to the natural law. They close the sexual act to the gift of life. They do not proceed from a genuine affective and sexual complementarity. I said that wrong. Under no circumstances can they be approved. The number of men and women who have deepened or deep-seated homosexual tendencies is not to be unrecognized. This inclination, which is objectively disordered, constitutes for most of them a trial. They must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives, and if they are Christians, to unite to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross with the difficulties they may encounter from their condition. Homosexual persons are called to chastity by the virtues of self-mastery that teach them the inner freedom, at times by the support of disinterested friendship. By prayer and sacramental grace, they can and should gradually and resultantly approach Christian perfection. So this idea of, chastity doesn't just mean like absence. Chastity is sexuality in the right context. So a husband and wife can be chaste. It doesn't mean that they're absent. I think a lot of people think that. I think that, the teaching here is that, the psychological part of it is unexplained. We don't know why. Events that happen in people's lives, people plant a thought when you're young and a seed, and that seed can grow, but regardless, I think that the church there has a good way of putting it. Listen, in no circumstances can it be accepted. It's disorder. It's not part of the natural order. But at the same time, there are people who fight this. And there are Christians who fight this. And they're just called to cling to the cross of Christ. That's the way that the church uses it's no, oh, it's all in your head. No, it's a sacrifice. It's probably going to be for some people, and all of us have some type of disordered temptation. And I know that sounds like people hear, oh, I'm saying disordered, and they think like, oh, that sounds like so hard. Or listen, I'm as jacked up as anybody. I got 50 million disordered. I mean, you got watch me eat 400 tacos from Taco Bell. Okay, it's messed up, and binge Saved by the Bell. Okay, but is that call to cling to the cross? We have to pick up the cross, and we have to understand. Yeah, we go through sacrifice, but we have a God who did the same. You make that choice. You make this connection back to God. You feel the light of charity flow through you. How has that been so far? Have you noticed since the absence of these encounters that the desire has lessened? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, it's actually, my life has, God has just absolutely and completely changed my life. I never, 3 years ago when I started this journey, coming back to God, I never thought that life could be so amazing. I never thought that I would have the things that I have now in my life. I have an amazing boyfriend who also serves God. I met him at church. And, I never thought that I would find somebody that would be able to love me because of all the things that I had done, God brought him, brought us across each other's path. And, I get to help young people. I was a youth leader for quite a while. And I really have a heart for young people. I feel like the next generation, we have to do what we can to help them succeed because they're under attack like never before.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, we didn't deal with these things, and that was only 15, 16 years ago when I was in high school. And I think, in the year 2022, the LGBT movement, it's socially acceptable now to be gay. I mean, you see commercials on TV with two men, and it's like
applauded.
no big deal. And so, but I think just because a custom is socially acceptable doesn't make it right. Look at the Old Testament. How many wives did they have? Abraham had a child with his handmaiden. It didn't make it right, but God's grace
Hagar
was sufficient. Yeah, so, we all fall short.
Think of
Even
that. Your
Abraham
wife's
did.
like, hey, I got an idea. Why don't you go sleep with the maiden? He's like, well, if I have to,
Twist my arm.
if you're going to twist my arm.
But, so that's just proof that we all fall short, but also that just because a custom, it was totally acceptable in that time, but it doesn't make it right. Abraham was called to a different standard. So, and I think, the transgender movement, it is a mental health issue. It's not a physical ailment that needs a medical doctor. If you had cancer, you wouldn't go to a cardiologist. That wouldn't make sense. And so, I think people need mental health treatment. They don't need body parts hacked off, and they don't need hormones injected into their bodies. They need mental health, better mental health services.
And I think it was viewed that way.
Yes.
Now it's almost like even the thought of therapy for this is really punished and frowned upon. I think that, one of the very deep theological topics that I don't think this discussion can even be understood without bringing in is Cobra Kai. So, did you watch Cobra Kai?
No.
Oh, gosh, dang it. You just ruined the whole show. I don't even know how we can air this thing now. Anyways, Cobra Kai. Remember the Karate Kid?
Yes.
Okay. So, in Cobra Kai, basically, it starts off with this, there's the Miyagi-Do karate class for kids and Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai starts off not bad. It gets really jacked up. When you watch it, Cobra Kai gets students, but who do they get? They get students who are lost, troubled, went through tragedy, suffering, outcasts. And then Cobra Kai takes these hurting people and actually turns them into worse people. And Jordan Peterson kind of has this idea that, humans by nature are tribal. We want to be accepted. So some of these communities, when we feel like, somebody feels like they're different, they feel not accepted, these communities form. And this is just an outlet to go to. And so it's not a coincidence that all of a sudden now people think that they're cats. And why is this taking off? Because there's a community out there. And maybe if I go this way, I'll find my happiness. And I think that, this is the problem. And it's not, we think that by encouraging these people, like, well, the best thing you could do for your child is give them buy them a litter box and put it in their closet. It's like, no, you are feeding the struggle that they're going through. Mm-hmm. And it seems like if you're, trying to correct that today, you're really viewed as a hateful person. I really wonder, how did the community that you were involved with before, how did they react since you've left that community?
Not well. People who detransition, there's actually a lot more people than you would think, but they're kind of silenced by that transgender community because, they feel like, well, be quiet because you're going to ruin it for the rest of us, and we're not where you are. So, we're going to keep living this way. And so if you speak out against this, you're going to ruin it for the rest of us. Is kind of how it's looked at. So I lost a lot of friends, and I do still have some, like on my Facebook, still follow me. They haven't all unfollowed me, surprisingly, but, quite a few of them have. And, my heart in all of it is just, I don't look down on them. I don't look at them differently. I still love them just the same, and I want, I want them to know God the same way I do. Unfortunately, a lot of them don't want that, and so, I think it was the same thing for me. I was ashamed, and so I ran from God instead of running to God. I think that's an easy thing to do. I
think that's how sin. That's the blueprint of sin.
Right. I mean, what did Adam and Eve do in the garden? They ran and hid. Instead of running to God, and they had a wonderful relationship with God. You know, they walked with Him.
And then they blame somebody else, basically.
Exactly. So,
which is usually the next step.
Right.
But we have to understand our God during this is when God sees their shame and they put on clothes. This is how God, He knows what they did, but He says, why do you have clothes on? Oh, we were naked. Well, who told you were naked? And He knows, and they're busted. At this moment, God sees His children, and He sees them with guilt, shame, fear. And instead of, He doesn't wipe them out. This is really when you see God Himself makes an animal sacrifice to make them clothes. They had their own righteousness that they were covering themselves with. But this is where God steps in and I will cover up your shame. And you see what God does immediately. He makes a sacrifice for them. God wants us and He's there for us. And He knows life is tough and we go through we're in this human body. We have a fallen nature, and our fallen nature is body and soul. Our whole being's fallen because of sin. Paul's very clear in this. The good things that I know I should do, I don't do. And the bad things that I don't want to do, I do. And he talks about the thorn in his side, and he never says what it is. Why? It could be whatever. It could be alcohol. It could be anger. It could be lust of any kind. I think that could be anything for any of us.
Yeah.
So you said you have so how long have you been dating your boyfriend now?
Officially since February this year. We've known each other since July of last year. So
That's great.
yeah.
I know just from the little bit of I watched from Matt Walsh's, What is a Woman?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You're fortunate
Yes.
because I know there are people who go so far where they, even when they avoid or they leave that, they don't feel like they could change back. They feel that the surgeries have been too far,
Right.
And yeah, I know this summer I had my appendix out. I didn't even like that about me. Another bad joke. You're like, why did I come on this show?
No, I think identity really, I think people, when they root their identity in things or feelings, they aren't fully understanding like their identity should be in God and who he created us to be. And so when you put your identity in things, one, you'll always be disappointed. And two, when people say things against that, you feel personally attacked. Because that's what you've rooted your identity in. But I feel like identity goes so much deeper than just sexuality or, being transgender. It's God is love even though people aren't loving. God is truth even though people lie. So people will always be people, and if you're rooting your identity in the things of this world, you're always going to be disappointed.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, truth, from a biblical point of view, truth is not something. Truth is someone.
Yeah.
It's Jesus.
Right.
And, God, in the beginning, God created them male and female, and God creates them in his image. His image and likeness really means the gift to be able to know, to love, to serve, to communicate, to worship God. I mean, think about it. Humans are the only species in the universe that we know has this ability to pass down religion.
Right.
I know earlier you were sharing some statistics.
Yes.
With me. I don't know if you have those.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and pull that up.
Handy. While you're pulling those up, I'm going to catch up on Cobra Kai.
So as of 2018, the suicide rate after hormone replacement therapy for children between the ages of 12 and 24 was 50%. And for people...
I think about that. 12 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, what parents are doing this?
It's sad. And then people 25 and older, that rate was 40%. So, and that's after hormone replacement therapy. You would think, why is that? You would think that, you had surgery, you've had hormone replacement therapy, you should be happy. You have, the things that you thought were going to fix, the problems that you thought were going to be fixed, and they're not. And it's because there's something missing, which we know would be God. You're still searching for that thing that is missing, and it's never going to be satisfied by the things of this world, because that's not, we're born, when you're born, there's just that thing in you that God places in you, it's like, and when you're not serving him, there's that missing piece. And so you may find it in drugs, you may find it in alcohol, you may find it in, changing genders or homosexuality or whatever the case may be. And you're never going to be satisfied because you're not filling that missing piece with what should be, which is God.
I think you'll really like this quote. St. Augustine, who we were talking about, arguably one of the greatest church fathers of all time, especially of the West. But he has this great quote: "Our hearts are restless, O Lord, until they find rest in thee." And it's true. God's the only thing that can fill that gap. I think in the transgender movement with those suicide rates, which, listen, our hearts break for those people. I think it's one of those things where you're trying to fill the void with something else, but it's almost like it's going all in, especially people who go so far with the surgeries. And when you go all in, you bet the farm basically, and then you still have that void. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really hard thing to deal with. Listen, I really want to thank you for coming on the show and opening up. Do you have any final words of encouragement for anybody battling the things that you've battled?
Yeah, I would say if you are struggling, find a group that can speak truth into your life and that they're going to be there, in those moments when you're questioning everything, when you're doubting yourself, that are going to be there and speak life to you. And also, we all have that voice, that still small voice. Don't silence it. I would just encourage people to listen to that voice. Follow what God's prompting you to do. We all have that. If you feel like you're going too far, stop. Waiting an extra year or 2 years to really figure out who you are, going to a therapist, these are things that are good. It's not going to impede anything. So, just slow down and take a step back and reevaluate what you're doing.
Yeah. So those are great words. So you love that bell, don't you? I like scaring people with it. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you again, Brittany. Folks, this is Brittany Pope. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for opening up and being honest and sharing with all of us. Anybody going through any type of these temptations, pick up your cross. I know it's hard. Pick up your cross. Give it to Christ. Get in the Word. Get to church. Don't forsake the assembly. Satan roams around like a lion looking for somebody to devour. Lions always get distracted. So be surrounded by other like-minded people. All right, guys. This is Nick Nolfi, the Catholic OCD podcast. Thank you guys for watching.